It's giving touched by an angel. Ah. Wow, this is very, it's kind of distracting, is it not? Oh well. It's a sunny, bright day out here in Miami Beach. So guys, I recently watched the new Netflix documentary on Pamela Anderson. You might have heard about it, you might have seen it, called Pamela, A Love Story. Pamela Anderson is a really interesting public figure, I think, and I believe that's where the hype of this documentary came from, and even probably the creation of the documentary was because people are fascinated by her, and I think women like her, meaning these iconic sort of sex symbols that have helped define a generation and define, in her case, like the beauty aesthetic of her era. I don't know if everybody in Gen Z knows who Pamela Anderson is, but I feel like everybody in my generation in America, even internationally really, but also the generation older than mine, Gen X, I feel like everybody knows who Pamela Anderson is. Kind of like the way that I think today everybody knows who Kim Kardashian is, despite not necessarily being able to specifically name what her talent is or what her career is outside of. She's famous, and she's kind of famous for being famous. I think Pamela Anderson is one of those people who, kind of like a domino effect, she became more famous through the fame or the notoriety that she already had, and it became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. She was a sex symbol. She wasn't an actress or a singer turned, sex symbol. She literally started out a Playboy girl. She was doing nude modeling, sexy modeling, and that turned into a whole career beyond that in acting, in kind of like what we now call the influencer model of like just brand partnerships, being the spokesperson for different brands and different causes and charities. So I went into the documentary already curious about her and whether it was conscious on her part to become this big icon that she became that basically helped define a generation, or whether it was kind of just right place, right time. Either way, I think fascinating, right? And so I was curious to see the documentary, and I knew the basics about her that are talked about in the movie. She's from Canada. She was discovered, in the way that models used to be discovered pre-social media, right? She was at a sports game, and she showed up on the jumbo screen. Through that, somebody noticed her and wanted her to do some modeling. That turned into Playboy contacting her, and boom, 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 one thing led to another, and before you know it, she became this like huge sex symbol, sort of caricature, if you will, of American society, though of course, again, she's actually Canadian. The movie has gotten really good reviews. To be honest, I was more interested in the first half because of the origin story and how things were for her at the peak of her career, like what her thoughts were, where she thought things were going, how I was curious about that domino effect. Like that was really interesting to me. And then about halfway through, I just started losing interest, and I kept watching, but I did that thing where like I was multitasking and I started kind of disengaging from the film fully and just trying to kind of complete it for the sake of completing it. I don't know if anybody who's watched the movie had the same reaction, but I just kind of got bored at a certain point that I felt like nothing that interesting was being shared anymore. And then it went into kind of the obvious angle of she's a survivor and now she's trying to rebuild her career. And I feel like that's what every one of these documentaries ends up being. Like Shania Twain had a Netflix documentary months ago, and it was the same idea of like, oh, what happens now that I'm no longer in my prime? Well, I'm just gonna start again. And then, as a viewer, my thought goes to like, oh, this is the point of the documentary. It's a self-promotional thing. So there's an agenda that is supposed to be like appealing to your compassion for the person, especially that it's a woman who's single and she's on her own and she's past her prime. So like, we have to support these women. So by the end, I guess I just felt it was a little gimmicky, the movie, when they start talking about her venturing into Broadway and all this stuff. But that aside, I'm aware too that my sort of disappointment as the movie evolved might have just been because I kind of already knew a lot of this stuff in the movie. The few things that I didn't know that were interesting to me were that her sex tape, her infamous sex tape, probably the first like real famous celebrity sex tape that was released to the public, I didn't realize that it was legitimately stolen from her home. Like I previously thought it was stolen, meaning like either her or her ex, Tommy Lee, the musician, talked to the wrong friends or like let a friend borrow it, and then that friend was obviously not a real friend. Like I thought it was that kind of thing. It was literally stolen, apparently, from like a safe that they had, that the entire safe was stolen with a bunch of other possessions. So allegedly it was actually stolen. I didn't realize the gravity of what the sex tape led to, meaning this was like the digital era was just beginning, so they kept fighting the distributor of the tape, and then eventually they kind of gave in because they just didn't want to fight anymore, but they weren't prepared for how quickly the video could get distributed online basically forever. So that was really interesting to me to hear. I also didn't know that she felt she hadn't capitalized off of her career as well as she could have, and that her career ended up dwindling. And in the movie you sense that she really has this regret about it, that she didn't strike while the iron was hot, if that makes sense. And I always thought that because she was so famous that she had a huge career that was brilliantly orchestrated, and it turns out she doesn't actually feel that way, and that she doesn't have the money or the resources that people would probably think she has at this point. All of that leads me into, for me, what the biggest takeaway was from the movie, what really struck me, which is something very similar to what I shared when I did a book review on this channel of Rose McGowan's book, Brave. And it was the same exact theme of, wow, this is a woman who has benefited from her looks her entire life, and her femininity and her existence as a woman, right? As a woman being embraced by the public for being a beautiful, alluring woman. But it's a double-edged sword, and that very same thing has cost her a lot, particularly abuse at the hands of men, molestation as a child, just a lot of different sexual, physical, and mental abuse throughout her life. Which culminated in this sex tape, right? Which is like the ultimate abuse. And she uses this word herself, saying it was almost like a rape, that now the public has access to this very private thing. Not only was it against her will or her consent, but she made $0 off of it. So it's like a double sort of harassment or assault. So to me, that was so interesting, how a woman who used her sexuality and her sensuality to build a career, that very thing since her childhood has been exploited in her. And again, it's reminding me of Rose McGowan in that it made me realize we go through life repeating cycles, and some of those things happen to us, right? But some of those things, it's almost like we attract them. Like, it's very well known that victims of sexual abuse oftentimes go into the career path of porn, Playboy, nude modeling, like whatever you want to call it, when that sexuality is awakened at a very young age and that power is taken away from somebody. It's a very well-known, well-documented thing that those same individuals will head in that direction as adults, because it's almost like either they want that power back, or that sexualization at a young age makes their libido or their sexual energy sort of amplified as adults. I don't know if I'm explaining this the right way or in the right sensitive vocabulary, but my point is just, I was fascinated that she's yet another example of somebody who grew up with sexual abuse, and that, like, what are the chances that then she becomes the goddess idol of the embodiment of female sexuality to not just men around the world, but also women around the world. Like, women wanted to be that blonde bombshell, still want to be that blonde bombshell that she was. So that for me, again, after reading Rose McGowan's book too, was fascinating that it's like, are we all just going through life constantly repeating the same cycle from our childhoods, whether it's positive or negative, like the same exact themes coming up over and over? And then you look at somebody like Pamela Anderson, and again, this double-edged sword of like, she built a huge career off of it. It's how she has the life she has today. It's how she has the kids she has today, right? The children of Tommy Lee. Tommy Lee would have never met her if she didn't become this like famous vixen. So it's made her the person she is today, but it's like, at what cost? Have any of you guys seen it? If so, let me know in the comments what you think. Or just in general, like what you think about her as a public figure. I think there's an allure to Pamela Anderson that is fascinating and kind of mysterious in a sense. And it's interesting that somebody who you could have seen naked could still seem so mysterious and like you feel like you don't really know much about her. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that at the peak of her career, in her prime, she wasn't on social media, right? That fame and that allure was all pre-social media.